Now that you know about the basic data types in Python, like you can store a number inside an integer, a decimal number inside a float, a true or false value inside a boolean, and a sentence, characters, alphabetic or numbers inside a string. So now, what if the data that we are trying to store or trying to work with is not as simple as this? Let's imagine a scenario. Let us say that you are a teacher and you want to make a program that grades the marks of each of the students in your class. Now, if you have 50 students in your class, you can't sit down and make a program that has 50 separate variables, right? That would be way too tedious and very error prone. So, here comes the collection data types in Python to our rescue. So, the most basic one is a list. It's very similar to a array if you have heard about it in any other programming language like Java or C. In a list, you can store a list of other variables or even literals. For example, instead of making 50 integers like student 1 marks, student 2 marks for all the marks of your all the different students, you will just make a list called marks. And that list can have a length of 50 and it can store the marks for each of the student in your class. Lists in Python can store any number of variables. They do not have a limit on their size. The only limit depends on the space inside your computer. And they can also store a lot of different data types. So it's not specific like a list for integers will only store integers in them. This is a thing that happens in other programming languages. So you might think that it also happens in Python, but no. There are a lot of useful methods in lists to be able to perform operations and process the data that is stored, but we'll cover that specifically in a video about lists. Now, let's go to another scenario. Now imagine that not only marks, but you want to make a program that generally processes data about your students. A program where you can ask who is the highest scoring student in my class or which student has not paid his fees yet, etc. So in that case, you don't just want to store a list of numbers, right? You want your data to be a lot more structured than that. You want your data to be associated with a particular student as well, right? Because when you store the information about a student, say age 10, fees paid, yes, marks 50, you also want to know that which student does this data belong to. So a list is not very helpful here, right? You can have a two-dimensional list, of course, where you can make a list of lists, which is also possible in Python, but that is very clumsy. So instead, we also have a dictionary in Python. Now, again, if you're coming from another language, you might have heard of hash maps or objects in JavaScript. So the similar counterpart for those things in Python is a dictionary. So a dictionary, as you can assume from the word, has keys and values. So in a dictionary, you can have a key, let's say the name of a student, and then you can have the value, like first name, the name of the student, last name, the last name of the student, etc. So instead of storing only the marks or a list of lists, now you can store a list of dictionaries. So that way you're storing all the data about your students. And now by reading the name of the student, you also know which student does this object belong to. And not only this, by now you might have even guessed that since we can have a list of list or a list of dictionary, we can also have a dictionary of dictionaries. So you can have something like the name of the student as a key and as a value, another dictionary which has other values like the age, the date of joining, the class, etc., etc. This is all about the dictionary. Now we have something called a tuple as well in Python, and you might come across a lot of tuples in your Python journey. So what is a tuple? So a tuple is just a list, but it is immutable. So by immutable, what it means that once you made a tuple, you cannot change the contents of it. So for example, if you make a list of 5 fruits and you want to change the second fruit from apple to banana, it's possible. But if the list was instead a tuple, you cannot do that. If you want a tuple where the second element is a banana and not an apple, you'll have to copy that first tuple, but make the second element different. So you make a completely different tuple instead of modifying the first one. So this is useful in a lot of places where you might want to make sure that your data does not change or is not modifiable. Now coming to the last one, it's the set. So a set is also very similar to a list, but it cannot have duplicate elements. So in a set, if you have a set with the values 1, 7, 7, 3, 4, 5, 5, the set will automatically remove the duplicate values and you will only be left with distinct values. And not only that, you can also perform set operations on set data types like union, intersection, difference, etc. So that is also a very useful data type in Python. Now that you know about these different collection data types in Python and in which scenarios they can be used, we'll learn about each of them in a separate video of for their own. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.